I am Lillian Lodge Copenhaver, Executive Director of the Copenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University. I am pleased to welcome you to the Virgil and Joann Smith Thought Leaders Forum, which celebrates Women's History Month. Our topic this afternoon is the power of giving voice. This workshop is one of the signature programs of the Copenhaver Center in support of its mission to empower young women in order to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their communities and in their professions. We are all aware that women make up more than half the population of our country, and it is important that we have a gender balance in all the forms in which we communicate information so that we can build a more equitable and inclusive society. Our program today features an amazing keynote speaker who will discuss a topic of vital importance in that process. Finding your voice and making that voice heard is the first step on the ladder leading to future success. Following our speaker's presentation, we will take questions from the audience. Please type them in the chat room. Our convener today, Michelle Marchante, health reporter at the Miami Herald, has covered a broad variety of stories, including COVID-19, hurricanes, crime, education, entertainment, and other topics in South Florida. She began working at the Miami Herald as a breaking news reporter shortly after graduating with honors from Florida International University, and was named the best Herald reporter in 2021 by Miami New Times. Marchante was one of 57 emerging journalists selected to be part of the 2020-2021 Pointer Koch Media and Journalism Fellowship, and is part of the Miami Herald newsroom that won a 2022 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news coverage of the Surfside building collapse. She previously worked as a news writer at WSVN Channel 7 in Miami and was editor-in-chief of Panther Now, FIU's student-run media outlet. Our keynote speaker, Betsy Corona, is the Senior Vice President of Editorial News Gathering at NBC News Group in New York. Her team of producers and reporters break and cover the stories which power the network's 24/7 live channels, MSNBC and NBC News Now. In her 2 decades in the business, she has covered every major story, winning an Emmy for live breaking news coverage of January 6th, and the Hillman Prize and LA Press Club Award for coverage of immigration and human trafficking. Corona holds an MBA with distinction from NYU's Stern School of Business. I am pleased to present to you Betsy Corona. Betsy?
Hi, everyone. It is a true honor to be here with you this afternoon. I want to start by thanking Dr. Lillian Lodge Copenhaver and the Virgil and Joann Smith Thought Leaders Forum for having me here today. I look forward to talking with Michelle later and answering all of your questions. And it is a wonderful time to be doing this as we wrap Women's History Month right now. My goal for us today together is to offer some real practical advice on the power of giving voice, how you find your own voice, and as Dr. Copenhaver was saying, how you use your voice to better the world around you as well. So I'm going to pull up some slides here for us to start. So let us start here. I am Betsy Corona, Senior Vice President of Editorial News Gathering for NBC News and MSNBC, which means that I lead news gathering for MSNBC and NBC News Now, and also start to drive editorial collaboration in breaking news and original storytelling around the organization. My team and I every day are thinking about what the important news stories are for us to be covering, and what resources and reporters to be putting on the ground, and how to tell those stories in the most impactful way. In short, what are the stories that we're giving voice to, and how are we giving voice to them? Our focus today is going to be on the power of the mic, using the mic, and owning the mic. That's the structure with which we're going to go through this and talk about how you give voice. But first, as I mentioned, I really want this to be practical for everybody and for you to take some things away from this and use them right after we stop talking this afternoon. So let's start with the big important questions to think about. As you are deciding what your message is going to be in the world, the very first place to start is, who are you? What matters to you? And what impact do you want to have in the world? So if you want to stop for just a moment and think about those things, who are you? What matters to you? And what impact do you want to have in the world? If you start to think about these questions, that's how you start to think about how you build your brand and you build your voice. Who do you want to be known as in the world? A little bit more about me. I'll take you on a journey from left to right on your screen here. The first two photographs on the left are the women who had a major impact on me as a little girl. You see my mom and I there on the left, headed to church one Sunday morning. And my earliest memories of her are how hard my mom worked. She went back to work several weeks after I was born. And she was always juggling between her busy job as a lawyer and coming home and taking care of us, a situation that I'm sure many of you can relate to at home. The other woman here then in the second shot is my aunt. You see her there in the Michigan State Capitol. She was a print reporter. And the thing that I remember early on about her was the interesting conversations that we had, even at the youngest of ages for me. And she really encouraged me to think about the world and ask questions and hone my sense of curiosity. In the middle, a face that many of you may recognize, I hope. The one on the left, not the one on the right necessarily. The one on the left is Katie Couric, also an incredible champion of women, a journalist, a Today Show anchor, and an icon from when I was growing up in the journalism and TV journalism world, which is the reason that a young high school Betsy Corona chased Katie Couric through the Washington, D.C. airport as I was heading to go to look at colleges, and I saw Katie Couric and actually threw my stuff at my mom and went racing after Katie Couric because I wanted her advice on how to become a female journalist, a TV journalist like her. The other reason that I have this picture there is it was in high school that we had something called Channel 1 News, which was a news program that was 12 minutes. It was seen in homeroom, and it was for middle schoolers and high schoolers. And it really tackled all of the big news stories of the day, but it did it in a way that it was relatable as a teen. But it was a moment that I realized the power of journalism, the power of telling important stories and giving voice to important issues. So the next picture is me in a car driving across the country with my mom. She's taking the photograph, where I then went to chase my dreams of working for Channel 1 News after college. I didn't have a job there yet, but I felt very certain that if I went and showed up on the doorstep of Channel 1 News in Los Angeles, that someone would let me do something there and get a job. And so I did. The last photo that you see on the right is my first press pass. There were lots of steps in between the photo in the car and the photo of my first press pass, including sweeping the floors because my first job was a stage PA, and running scripts and printing scripts. But over time, I gained the trust of the bosses and my colleagues and became a researcher and then an associate producer and ultimately a producer for Channel 1. So what does that say about who I am and what I care about? I value hardworking women in leadership, journalism, the importance of storytelling, and the messages and the power of giving voice to those stories. So I want to share some clips here with you that I think illustrate strongly the power of the mic. In journalism, we are quite often giving voice by sharing people's stories. And what is key there is what are the stories that we're telling and who are the voices that we're choosing to illustrate those stories. So let me stop for 1 second here, and I'm going to share a different screen. Yeah. I made the joke earlier that I am typically the one that is behind the scenes. So I think we've got it here. Let me give it a start here at the beginning. All right, here we go.
If I can, I want to just let you hear what we are hearing live in real time. We have our translator, Ivan, with us. I was talking to Oksana. She arrived here not long ago from Kharkiv. That is one of the hardest hit areas in eastern Ukraine. Oksana, you were telling us that just a few days ago, you were making a costume for Goran for his school play on March 8th, and now you're here.
Yes, my children were going to kindergarten. They were 6 and 2 years old. They were going to kindergarten. We were preparing for 8th of March. We were living our life. And look at us now. We've been not sleeping for 2 days. We're living this terrible life because someone decided that my children should not have home anymore. We just put everything we had in our bag, but the rest of the clothes we left in Ukraine. Our city is destroyed.
What was the best part of today?
Feeding the animals. Feeding the animals.
These kids are part of the Melanin Village, a collective of Black families that homeschool. Parents work to make learning engaging and warm for their kids after years of feeling let down by public schools. Before the pandemic, only 3% of Black students were homeschooled. By 2021, it shot up to 16%. Many, like Brenea Fairchilds, say they aren't going back.
There's a joke amongst homeschoolers that we homeschool, but we're never home.
When did you decide that this is what you wanted for your kids?
I would say homeschooling has been both a heart and a head decision for me. I looked at the presentation of slavery and the Civil War in U.S. history textbooks, and I saw that, okay, it's not accurate.
As Black families perhaps exit public school systems, for the Black kids who get left behind, what's going to be there for them?
Not only do I worry about that, but also Black home educators worry about that.
At 15, Victoria asked her mom, Bernita, to take her out of Detroit schools. She says she was being bullied relentlessly for her appearance, and it didn't seem like her administrators cared.
It made me not want to ask questions, or not want to ask specific questions because I'm like, am I they're going to call me dumb.
When you transitioned to homeschooling, how did you start to feel about yourself?
I felt more confident. It was just kind of like a sunshine, like the clouds opening a little bit.
An injunction would cut off access to mifepristone nationwide.
If the plaintiffs win this lawsuit, what will be the effect?
It will be devastating. Even in places where they've worked very hard to secure access to abortion, states like California, New York, here in D.C.
Abortion providers like Dr. Serena Floyd say the lawsuit is based on misinformation.
How dangerous is this medication?
It's not dangerous at all. The evidence is solid. The science is solid. The complication rate is less than 1%.
The FDA told NBC News it does not comment on ongoing litigation, but in a court filing said the claims in the lawsuit are, quote, unsupported by any evidence. Since 2000, more than 5 million women have taken mifepristone, with 28 deaths associated with the drug reported.
Millions of women have taken these drugs safely. Doesn't that paint a contrary picture to your complaint?
I'm seeing these women in my own practice. My emergency room physicians, they're telling me how frequently they're seeing these complications. That women come in with retained tissue, with heavy bleeding, with serious life-threatening infections.
In a court brief, the country's leading group of OBGYNs say mifepristone is, quote, exceedingly safe and effective.
All right, I think we're back. Oh, hold on. Michelle, can I get a thumbs up? Do you see the presentation again?
Yes, I see it.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. So there you saw the power of the microphone in terms of who we are choosing to tell, whose stories we are choosing to tell, and the voices that we are choosing to tell them. You may recognize this quote, "With great power comes great responsibility," from Spider-Man, but it is very accurate and can be applied to your lives right now as you think about how do you share your message? What are the messages that you're choosing to share on your social media? Who do you share your mic with? Whose messages do you choose to amplify? How does that message fit with what you want to be known for? Again, going back to what do you want your brand to be? What is the message you want to tell? One other thing I would say here to really think about is when you are reposting or snapping or sending a TikTok to a friend, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And when you're sending it to somebody else, you're ultimately saying that you trust that source and you are amplifying that message. So just be wary of what you're putting out into the universe and whether you really want that message to represent you. How are you using your microphone? You can also then, once you have decided on what your message is that you want it to be, you may decide to use the mic yourself. So you're no longer amplifying other stories or choosing voices that you think represent something you care about, but you're using the mic yourself. So a great example of this is Mika Brzezinski, who is a host of Morning Joe on MSNBC, and her message is very clear. Know your value. This is a message that she shares with women, not only in the US, but around the world. She brings very strong women leaders onto the show and tells their stories, but then has a very clear message too. Take a listen.
I was staggered by how many women came up to me since the book first came out. Every day, everywhere I go, I read your book, I got a raise. Women from all walks of life. I read your book, I got a raise. I thought I was sharing a few little stories about, ways that we can improve, what not to do, what to do. I had no idea how universal the theme was. Successful women getting there despite these issues, or women who just don't know even how to get in the door, what to do, what to look like, what to feel like, how to do it. And it is actually, once you get there, so simple. And so that's what I love about it, because I love to watch the light bulb go off in women's heads and see them take ownership of this. But now more than ever, we need to own our voices, we need to use them, and then we need to handle what comes after.
Own our voices, know them. What is your message? What is the message that you want to own? For Mika, it's know your value. For you, it might be something different. When you're developing this message, though, that might be the hardest part, and it may take you 20 years. But when you know what that message is, make sure that it fits with, again, who do you want to be known as in the world? What is your brand? And then just like this wrap dress has stood the test of time and style, make sure that what you're putting on is something that's going to stand the test of time for the next 20 years. Is it a message that you'll feel good about representing you? And I would say your words and your posts have power even now in this moment. Is it a message that if you're using the mic yourself, is it something that you're going to be still proud of in 20 years to represent? Our third piece of this puzzle today, owning the microphone. And when I'm saying owning the microphone, part of my job is much more behind the scenes, not in tech as you have seen, but behind the scenes editorially, and helping drive and shape the stories that we tell, and also the corporate culture that we live in and we want to foster at NBC Universal. A couple of things about what I've chosen here in terms of graphs. 2023, as we entered this year, really great news in terms of leadership. The leadership in terms of CEOs for the Fortune 500 had been stuck at 8%, only 8% of Fortune 500 CEOs were women, and it inched up 2% to 10%, which, believe it or not, is real progress, but certainly leaves us space to go, as we would need to increase it fivefold to reach parity with men. And then on the right, you see a chart. This was a study done by the McKinsey Group for leanin.org, a study called Women in the Workplace. And it looks at the representation of women in leadership and then also breaks it out by women of color. So I want to direct your attention specifically to the bars on the right, the senior level of leadership, though a little bit short of the CEOs or the top slots. Still, only 1 in 5 C-suite leaders is a white woman, and only 1 in 20 of our C-suite leadership are women of color. So a lot of room to grow in that space. Why it matters, I do want to share this photo as well. This is a picture of success, and I also think a representative of why women in leadership matters. So what you're looking at, I've been at NBC News for 15 years at this point, and this, as far as I know, has never happened. This photo was taken 2 weeks ago at a really special dinner that convened a group of women leaders in the NBC News group. And in that group, you have EPs of the Today Show, the EP of Nightly News, the president, Rashida Jones of MSNBC, the head of our DEI team, Yvette Miley, leadership of digital, leadership of politics, leadership of our legal team, leadership of our ops team. So in front of the camera, like shows, programming, and also those behind the scenes functions as well. And then our new president of editorial, who was recently named, also a woman. And this is just like an incredible photo of what it can look like. And here is a very local level example, a specific example of why it matters to our employees. I have her approval to be sharing this with you because it is somewhat personal. But this is our correspondent, Marissa Pera, who posted last week on Instagram about her decision to freeze her eggs. And one of the things that, as she and I have been talking about this, she had just joined our organization as a correspondent, relatively new, and said that this was a decision that she really wanted to make, and she was hoping that she would have my support in. And we talked about it, and right away, I've gone through the same journey myself, and I was very happy to right away say, absolutely, we'll figure it out. If you need to be off the road for a few weeks, we can totally figure that out. And so I highlight on the right, in her words, not mine, to have the option at all is still something I recognize as a form of serious privilege to work for a company that covers this with bosses who encourage it. I just think it's a very specific example of how women in leadership and a company that recognizes the role of women and women as leaders can bear out for the workforce as well, and the impact that you can have behind the scenes too. So how do you give voice? Just a recap here, start big. Who are you? What matters to you? What do you want your impact to be? What is your brand? Then the power of the mic right now, something you can think about in your next post on Instagram or TikTok or to a friend. Who do you share your microphone with? How does it reflect you? Using the mic. Again, this might take time. Don't feel like you have to know the perfect message right now. But as you shape your message and you find your voice and you use the microphone yourself, with great power comes great responsibility, and make sure that that message represents you and your brand and who you want to be in the long term. And then finally, owning the mic. This is where you can have an impact behind the scenes, even when you aren't owning the mic or when you aren't using the microphone yourself. Support representation and leadership, and cheer for women leaders to succeed. That doesn't mean you're gonna have to agree with everything a woman leader does, but if you hear that, decide whether you wanna be a part of it, because it's gonna happen. But the more that we can champion each other and be there for each other, it really does make a difference. And then when you are in charge yourself, keep in mind, how can you better the lives of other women from behind the scenes too? So with that, again, thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I hope that this has been helpful on the power of giving voice, and I look forward to your questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Betsy, for that wonderful presentation. And we'll now be opening the floor for questions from the audience. But while we wait for them to come in, I do have one question for you. We have a lot of students in the audience. So when they start off in the job, they'll be entry level, they're looking for internships. They might feel like they don't have a space in the table to have a voice because they're in the beginning of their career. Do you have any advice for them on what they can do to make sure they're still being heard in their workplace?
I think that you always have a voice, right? Like, even as we were just talking about right now, you're using your voice and you're building your brand. I think that even in those limited moments, so when you are an intern, use your voice in the room. Say you have an internship and you're in an editorial meeting, right? And you might be thinking, I was an intern at CNN, and you're thinking, oh, I don't know, do I see something? I have an opinion on this. You do. Quite often you have a perspective that newsroom needs, because you actually are seeing an issue or a story from a different angle that somebody else on the team might not be thinking about. So make sure that you step in there. You say, hey, I have a thought on this, and what about if we did it this way? Because there's a ton of value in making sure that we are getting in all voices in the newsroom.
Thank you so much, Betsy. We have a question from the audience as well that I think kind of goes into what you just said. Someone wants to know, Nicole Malanga wants to know, you have any advice on supporting and growing a relationship with a mentor, especially a mentor that is within the same organization?
So first, I would say I love that question, and I'm a mentor officially in a couple of capacities, and then unofficially in several other capacities. In so many organizations, there are two different routes to go. So my first suggestion would be to find out if your organization has a formal mentoring program and ask to be a part of it, and say, hey, the next time that you're pairing mentors and mentees, I would really like to be a part of that program. If your organization does not have a formal mentorship program, I will share a story from early on when I was a senior producer working on a show, and a woman named Tracy was our graphics PA. And we were in the elevator one day, and she looks at me and she's like, you're going to be my mentor. And I had a moment where I was like, oh, okay. And but it was this wonderful moment where she named it. I was already unofficially, giving her advice, and had tried to take her under my wing and find opportunities that might be a great fit for what her interests were. But then she had the voice to say, hey, you're now my mentor. And it made me feel great too, because I was like, oh yeah, okay, I sure am. Let's do this. And I think it just took that relationship to the next level. So, feel out your relationship, but certainly officially finding out what the opportunity is. Are there programs? And then if there's someone that you really want to have be your mentor, seeking them out and maybe asking them instead of cornering them in an elevator, but just saying, hey, is this something that you would be comfortable with? Because I really look up to you and would value your insights.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And a question from Jennifer Ivy is, do you have any advice for when your voice is consistently ignored or dismissed?
I'm pausing because it's a tough one. Look, we've all been in the room, in many rooms where we don't feel valued and we don't feel heard, and maybe you try and you get in there and you have something that you want to contribute, and I don't know, somebody speaks over you. Or my personal favorite is when you say something and then 5 minutes later somebody else says it, and then everybody in the room is like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And you're like, I said that 5 minutes ago, right? So I think that can be, I get it. I feel you. It can be incredibly frustrating. I think this is not going to be the most satisfying answer, but some of it is patience and then to keep trying, and that you will find rooms where people will listen. And so when you do find somebody who can be that person, that can be the other person in the room who will build on your idea, who will elevate your voice, and will be the person 5 minutes later who says, hey, that was a great idea. Didn't you just hear, whoever just said it, right? Like find the rooms where someone will build you up. And frankly, I don't know, maybe preset it with somebody, right? If you have an ally in the room, maybe somebody can help you to help buoy your point and help make sure that it's landing. I hope that's helpful.
And I actually have a follow-up for that. So you mentioned, having someone like in your corner as an ally. So what can executive and mid-management professionals in the organization do to help their female staff members find their voice and actually be heard and give them the opportunity? What are some examples? What should be people looking for when they're looking for a job? What should the organization be like?
I love this question. It's something I think about every day, is how I'm trying to help people use their voice. The biggest thing is listening. If you can find a boss, if you can find a leader, if you can find a manager who will listen. And that's not the same as always agreeing, right? Sometimes you may have the most spirited exchanges with a middle manager or an upper level manager about something that you might very well disagree. But the key thing is to find someone who will listen and wants to listen and wants to engage with you. And that will be an environment that you want to be in, because that is most likely a place where your voice can be heard. If people, the first step is seeing if somebody's listening.
And then also for women who are maybe, they're already more established in their career, why is it important for them to try to help other women that are maybe just starting their career, help them grow, whether it's through mentorship or just assisting them in their job? Can you kind of talk about the importance of that dynamic?
Yeah, hugely important. And it's not just important for being able to give advice or having somebody to come to for, to bounce something off of, but you really want to find somebody who is willing to go to bat for you and looking for opportunities for you. So in addition to being a sponsor or a mentor, sometimes we talk about sponsors, right? Who's the person that will go in behind the locked door and has access to conversations that you don't, and will say, hey, this is the person that is the perfect fit for this assignment. And that having that access that you wouldn't normally have is incredibly important. And I would just say the relationship goes both ways. There's a lot of value. I mean, my mentees teach me every day, and they're bringing valuable different ideas for stories and angles, and again, different voices that we should be including in stories. So, when you're in a mentor role, sometimes you might mentee role, you feel like, oh, I don't want to bother them. But you're not in the best relationships here. There's a lot of value that's going both ways.
And in terms of just being in the workplace, have you seen any career prospects for women in journalism changing? Are you seeing a change in the type of roles that are available or the roles that women are going into? How have career prospects changed through the years?
I go back to that photo of the dinner that we had. When I was in my MBA program, I wrote a paper how respectfully, it didn't make any sense to me why the EPs of all the morning shows were men, when those shows are primarily viewed and consumed by women, right? And And now here we are 10 years later, and at least 2 of the 3 major morning shows are EP'd by women. So on the networks, which I think is huge progress. So to the opportunity gap that still exists, but I do think that the opportunities for women are evolving and growing. And I think with the increased platforms that you see in the media, especially, there's just so many different platforms out there that there are more opportunities with that as well.
And what about like for people who maybe they're experiencing a situation in their workplace where they don't feel heard, or they're not really sure how to approach, maybe they feel intimidated because they're still new. Do you have any like strategies you do, any like tips to like, I guess, break the ice in these meetings to make sure you get your point across for students?
Two thoughts on that front. One is I would come to every meeting with one idea, one good idea. You don't have to have 7. One good idea that you're really proud of and that represents what you care about, what your message is, who you are. You're building your brand again in every interaction that you have. So I would say coming to the meeting, come to every meeting with one good idea. I guess I'll leave.
And what about like in terms of, you mentioned in your presentation, picking the messages you choose to amplify. When you're talking about that, are you referring to the messages you are doing as a person, as an employee, or is it also the topics that you're covering? Because in journalism, you have to cover a lot of things, even if you don't agree with it. So how do you juggle that?
No, it's a great question. I think I think it applies both personally and professionally. So I think personally, I do really encourage everyone to think about because it blends, right? Our personal messages and our professional messages, it all blends these days. Personally, just making a note for myself, personally, I think in your online footprint, what you're posting, how you're posting, just think about that. And then professionally, Michelle, to your point, we're going to cover a lot of things, right? And frankly, in journalism, your job, right, is to distance yourself from it in many ways and to cover the story. I think, though, where the opportunity lies is the voices that you choose in each story. So maybe you're doing a story about COVID, right? Are you consulting a doctor that is a 60-year-old white man? Or are you finding a woman of color who is equally qualified to speak about the topic of COVID from a medical perspective? So I think that is an example of the opportunity, again, of who are the messengers that you choose to amplify, is the way I would say it in that space. There's opportunity to give voice to somebody else, even when you're, covering a story like COVID.
And I think that's a good point. Also, you want to represent the community that you're covering in the people that you're interviewing as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we have a question from Claudia Nan. They want to know if you have any advice for people who are struggling with finding an internship or a mentorship.
Two different ways to an internship and a mentorship. I would separate them slightly. Because a mentor can be anyone in your life who you admire and respect. I would consider my aunt to be a mentor. She didn't open any job doors for me, but she was there for me as I maybe was struggling to find an internship, right? She was someone that gave me practical advice. So a mentor can be anyone in your life, in your community, and looking at the people around you that you admire and think about and starting that dialogue around, hey, I really do look up to you and admire you and think you've got a lot of valuable advice, and I would love opportunity for us to get a coffee. It quite often starts with a coffee or a tea or whatever it might be, right? Or a lunch. So mentorship, I would say that's a good way to start. Who do you admire, and what's a little thing you can do with that person? And then for an internship, there are a lot of boards out there, a lot of message boards that'll have internships posted. But I guess I would start for myself. It was kind of the Channel One approach, where I knew the place that I wanted to work, and I didn't know at all how the process worked, but it was doggedness, journalistically, it was doggedness to figure out, okay, who am I calling? How am I getting my foot in the door? What is the process there? But doing that homework to figure out, okay, identify the place you want to be or the kind of work you want to be doing, and then go to that place and say, hey, I really want an internship here. And even if they don't have a formal internship program, I know sometimes they can create one. Or they may say, hey, we don't have an internship program, but this other organization that it does similar work might have an internship that would fit for you. And if they don't offer that, ask, hey, okay, well, you don't, but do you know anybody who does? And then it might be a great fit.
I think that's great, especially for students. I remember when I was looking for an internship, it's just like, it's a lot of stress on students. So I think that's really great advice. And also, I'm just going to say this, if like, for example, FIU has an internship coordinator, so they can also help you find an internship. So definitely check with your school for that. We have the question from Vanessa Bustos. She wants to know what you think are the qualities that are essential for someone to be a voice for a big organization as a woman leader during these times. What do you think are the essential qualities they should have?
The first thing that came to my mind is perhaps counterintuitive, but heart. And then I would say strength, probably second. A little more on those. Heart, I think we've all experienced in the last few years so many changes in the country, in the world, through COVID. I think I've seen firsthand that it has forced our organization to really deeply think about the culture in which we're working together. And Caesar, our chairman of the news group, talks about the 3 C's and culture and connection content. But it's important to, as a leader, care about the people whom you are leading and being able to listen and relate. And then also strength, because you're going to have to make a lot of hard choices in certain stories and the economic environment. Sometimes there's no good decision to make. So you have to be confident also in yourself and your team, and then have the strength to make the tough decision oftentimes. But I don't know, maybe it's just me, but heart's the first thing that comes to mind.
And do you, you gave us some examples during your presentation. Do you have any examples of moments where you really had to like struggle to get your voice be heard, that people can maybe learn from that? Or an experience you saw a colleague go through?
Yes, I'm thinking and choosing carefully, candidly here. So I think that there are often, the hardest thing is when, and I see this at work often, where people may struggle to feel like they're struggling to have their voice heard. 2 ways. I think sometimes it's when you may not be a part, it may be hard to even just be a part of the conversation that you want to be a part of. And sometimes there's a very direct approach to just saying, I want to be a part of that conversation, and I'd really like a seat at that table. I'd really like to be in that room. And if that doesn't work, then it may take time, but saying to the people who may have some sway in who's in the room, hey, I'd really like to be a part of that room. I had a manager and leader and mentor for a very long time who she knew I was like frustrated. I was not part of a conversation in leadership, and I just really felt like I deserved to be in there. And she guided me toward sort of patience, but also I knew on the flip side, she was also advocating for me to be in that room. And ultimately, when I ended up in the room, the one thing that she gave me as constructive advice too afterward was, now you're here, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? And so sometimes I do think we may get a little caught up in like, I want to be there, I want a seat at the table, but make sure that when you get it, that you have something to say and that you're ready to use your voice and you're willing to use your voice, because there are still rooms that we'll all be intimidated in, but you're in the room. Now, what are you going to say? So I think that's why I go back to, what is your message? What is your brand? What do you want to be known for in the world? How do you want to have an impact? What are the stories that matter to you if it's related to journalism?
I think that's really good advice, especially it goes back to your point of finding allies and supporters in your workplace. And we have a question from Nicole Malanga about women of different ages supporting each other in the workplace. She wants to know if you have any thoughts on how women of different ages can support each other. For example, older woman versus younger woman supporting each other. How can that dynamic work?
Yeah, I would be interested if there was like a specific, so I'm soliciting for if there was a specific situation that is leading to that question. I certainly think more experienced women sharing what they've been through and anything that they've learned in terms of like, hey, I've been in that situation before, and here's how I navigated it successfully. Or frankly, hey, I tried to navigate this situation this way and it did not work and blew up in my face. So if you have experience, being generous with that experience, if you're in the position like I am with some of my mentees these days of here's what I've been through and here's how I can get through it. But again, it's a two-way relationship, and I learn just as much from my mentees. One of my mentees, Tracy, who was the one who asked me in the elevator, she's the one that signed me up for all of my social media. And this was a long time ago. But she signed me up for all of my social media and kind of gave me the ins and outs of how to use my voice in a new forum and how to think about the messages that I wanted to put out into the world into a new way. And so it can really be a two-way dynamic too. And I think, one of the things that is your superpower when you go into an organization and you're the new person, I know that it doesn't feel that way if you're the intern or you're the new hire, but you have an incredible superpower in that you see the organization with fresh eyes, and you may have a great approach or way of thinking about a problem that no one else has thought of before. So again, it's a real opportunity to use your voice. And if there's a woman who has more experience and might have more sway in the conversation, that might be the person to go to say, hey, I have this new idea. Can you help me figure out how to use my voice to share it?
And I think that kind of leads into the next question. You've kind of touched upon it throughout the entire presentation, but why is it so important for women to have a place at the table at the workplace and be able to help navigate through what type of stories the organization covers? Why is that so important?
I think this applies for women certainly, but I think it applies for all sorts of representation in leadership, and especially news. We are better journalists, better storytellers. We have more vigorous thought and fewer blind spots, and specifically I'm thinking about journalism right now on air and what we do. But when there is greater diversity in the conversation and choosing what stories we tell and how we tell them, the more voices that are involved in that conversation, you just end up with better content. I think about a story that one of the stories that I'm the most proud of working on the team with from last year, just quickly if I can. One of our producers in Los Angeles came to me, and in this case, he said, I have a lead on a story about Chinese migrants being forced to work illegal grow operations in the cannabis industry. And I think they're being trafficked. And it was certainly not a story that was on the front page of any paper, Michelle, yours or mine, or whatever at this point. But it was a story that we ended up pursuing for the course of the year, and produced a real powerful body of work, and also change at the government level. The government of California state responded and has taken action to crack down on it too. So the more diversity in the conversation, certainly the better. And I also think, finally, culturally, behind the scenes, off air, you create bridges and pathways where people feel safer to be honest, and feel safer to have their voice heard. We've all been there, right? When you're the only person of whatever, fill in the blank in a room, you just don't feel as safe as to share your thoughts. And especially if you have a contrary opinion, you just don't feel as safe as when you're in a room with somebody else who you can relate to in some way, just at the base level. So the more that our newsrooms, the more that our organizations represent the world that we live in, the more that we create, I think, a safe space for people to really use their voice.
Thank you so much. And I just want to let the audience know we're getting close to the end of the session. So please submit your questions now so we can make sure we get to them. And we might have room for one or two more questions. So Betsy, also in terms of, the landscape of journalism, what opportunities are there that you're seeing today for women? And what are still some of the challenges women are facing in the field?
In terms of opportunity, I think that as I mentioned, the proliferation of platforms, podcasts, YouTube, it creates a whole new world. I think, again, when you're using your voice, though, with great power comes great responsibility, that whatever the forum, whatever the medium that we have now or will in the future, there's a great opportunity there, and an opportunity for people to do it themselves. I have a friend who was feeling like it was harder to make the impact that she wanted in the traditional media space, and she is a hugely successful podcaster and TikToker, and is using her voice that way and to real effect. So I would say that's a real opportunity. In terms of the space that we have to grow, I would go back to that slide. In leadership, you're far from parity, and when you add in diversity of all kinds, we are even further from what would be the best place for us to be. So that's an opportunity, if you look at it, as well as a challenge, that I hope so many of you on this call will take up and continue to close that gap.
And something you mentioned in your presentation was, being careful about the articles or videos that you share with others, because you're essentially telling people on social media, I trust this source. And I think this can go for anyone, even if they're not in journalism. People are using TikTok a lot for news, Instagram, Facebook. Do you have any tips for people who want to be journalists, or they're just very interested in media, on how to verify sources, especially with the ease of TikTok and Instagram that just pops up and you're like, ooh, before you even look who it comes from?
So very quickly, I'm mindful of our time here, but my partner has a daughter who's a freshman in college, and she was posting something today. We went through this today. She was posting something on her Insta story specifically around gun violence, and part of it was a call to action and named a few specific groups. Most of those groups I had heard of, one of those groups I had not heard of, and especially since it said donate to these groups, can you imagine how annoying it would be if I was looking at your Insta story all the time? I messaged her and I said, hey, I've heard of all of these, but I haven't heard of this one. We may want to check it out, right? And so then she and I both went down a rabbit hole online of cross-referencing, and this is where I'm going with this, is cross-reference it. What are legitimate mainstream sources? How many, if it's an organization you're trying to figure out, you can check with Better Business Bureau, you can check with certain organizations that validate nonprofits and say, yes, this is a safe place to donate your money to. You can see what are the articles that organization is referenced in. We were able to cross-reference, and it was in fact a legit organization. So that was the upside of that story. But taking the time to do it, we also both learned something too.
Yes, definitely cross-referencing is really important. And we're getting close to the end of the panel. So I think we can probably just start getting ready. But thank you so much, Betsy, for taking the time to speak to us. And thank you again for participating. Thank you everyone for coming to the Copenhagen Center's conference. We appreciate it. And thank you to our audience and for the questions.
Thank you so much again to the audience for all the questions, for your time, and the privilege of spending this time with you. And Michelle, thank you for the amazing questions and being our moderator. Dr. Copenhagen, one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was a wonderfully enlightening session, and I hope that everyone who's joined us today has learned a lot from it. Thank you, and we're done.